Welcome back, everybody, to more from the Stabilize. I'm here today with Blake. How's it going, Blake?
Doing well, thanks, Mitch.
That is good, and we are going to have a quick run through of the Malamar Giratina list that Blake used in our last proxy boxing video, or training center. Got to catch myself, it's training center now. So we're going to have a look at this list, which is fresh and ready for the new Worlds format. Take it away, Blake.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's at its core, I mean, it's still Malamar. So we've got, of course, a 4-4 Malamar line.
Beautiful.
You can't really afford to go any less, especially like now that we've lost Rescue Stretcher. Brock's Grit is like our only means of returning Pokemon into the deck, and it's not great. So
That's
if
true.
you are forced to play it, it's not going to be quick access. So even more now than ever, you have to be playing your maxed out copies of your important Pokemon. So
and one of the real positives of the Malamar line as well is that it's actually one of the easiest Pokemon to search in the game now, because Mysterious Treasure can find your Malamar pieces for you, so you don't need to have the kind of stress that things like Pikachu Zekrom have, where they need to be playing like more Pokemon in order to use Pokemon communications. In this deck, you can just use your traditional Pokemon search, I suppose.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, Malamar's Rejoice as their perfect search of Mysterious Treasure only specifies Psychic or Dragon types, and if you're running this or like Ultra Malamar, everything's pretty much Psychic or Dragon types, so you're pretty happy about that.
Feel free to move your cards slightly to your right as well, Blake, because we have plenty of space and we don't want people to miss out.
Let's just chuck them in the middle and we'll move them over when we're done.
Sounds good.
Next up, we've got some of our consistency. We've got 3 copies of Jirachi here. Now, there's not really space for 4. I don't think you need 4. I've always floated around 2 to 3 for Malamar. I think 3 is a good number. In the new format, like, consistency is king. So whatever you can do to give yourself the edge over your opponent. Yeah,
Jirachi's going to be a real hardcore staple in lots of lists. Obviously, our Pikachu Zekrom list ran Jirachi. There's a high chance that things like Reshiram Charizard are going to run Jirachi. All sorts of decks are looking to this card as their main source of support. 3 seems like a pretty solid number. It's one of those ones where you used to run like maybe down to 2, but because you can't just Nest Ball it out or Ultra Ball it out, you need to find it in other ways. 3 copies of Jirachi gives you 1, an opportunity to start off with it in the active, but 2, it means that you're more likely to find it in the mid to late game.
Yeah, and also with Jirachi, it's also very good against the new Menace and Reset Stamp. So if you've pushed on ahead in your game and you get Reset Stamps to 2 to 1 cards, it's a good chance you're gonna rely on a Jirachi to Stellar Wish and get you out of that trouble. Yeah.
It's going to be real tough with Reset Stamp. People are going to really need to think about how quickly they are taking prizes, and Jirachi's a good way to mitigate the threat.
And here we get to the meat of the deck. So we've got 2 copies of Distortion Door in Giratina. We use this to spam the ability as much as possible, and also just deal as much damage as possible with Shadow Impact, and it's also our main target for our spell tags to add even more spread.
Certainly is, and Giratina means that you have a free discard for things like Viridian Forest or for Mysterious Treasure. You can discard that for free because you can just pop it back onto your bench, get to make the most of the ability, and because you've got Malamar, it's the exact same level of threat that it was in the previous format, a 130 HP basic without the letters GX on it, that can hit for 130 is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it 2-shots most tag teams, and I think one of like the most underrated things about Giratina is with Rescue Stretcher gone, it's even more powerful because it's one of the few things that can just recycle itself over and over again.
We don't need to worry about only playing 2 of them because we can just get them back.
As long as we've got 1, if we lose it, we don't have to worry about shuffling it back in. He'll just pop back on the bench as soon as we need him. So
yeah, exactly. And with Alolan Muck gone, there's very little that's going to stop your Giratinas from being able to cycle. So once they're in the bin, you can use them as many times as you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to our supporting Pokemon. We have 1 Scoop Up Block Mr. Mime. Now, in this format, Worlds format, that pretty much the only form of healing we have is Super Scoop Up. Now, we haven't really got the chance to see many decks that are going to try and play Super Scoop Up, but against the ones that do, yeah, a Super Scoop Up heads can sort of just like destroy this whole strategy. So I figured for the first draft I'd test out this mine with the Scoop Up block to try and prevent that from happening.
Yeah, it's obviously a tech card depending on what sees play. If people choose not to go with Scoop Ups and instead use some other form of healing to be able to mitigate the half hit, then maybe Mr. Mime isn't the way to go. But I think it's a good idea because I know myself and Jordan, we've been testing lots of decks behind the scenes with a whole bunch of other people from the Stabilize, and Super Scoop Up is a card that is seeing a lot of play, so maybe not a bad idea to consider.
Something to keep in the back of your mind for sure. Perhaps my first draft, as many have noticed, probably should have been a Mew. I foolishly thought that this deck was so strong it didn't matter if I got tag bolted or not, but
Yeah,
clearly I was mistaken.
It's a bit of a risk, but hey, it could have paid off, and if it did, you would have looked like a genius. But yeah, no, Mew's definitely a solid inclusion, and it could take that spot of the Mr. Mime.
Exactly, and we'll actually move on to our first new card in this deck, which is another support Pokemon in Deoxys and Espeon tag team. Now this card's pretty cool. In a format without much Gust, Guzma's gone, Counter Catcher's gone. The only Gust left is abilities on Pokemon like the Fire-type Ninetales and Custom Catcher. And only a few decks can afford to play them. Obviously, the fire decks which have synergy, and the decks that can play like Green Search and stuff like that can grab custom catches. So we're not one of those decks, so we need a way to be able to take prizes on the bench once we've done a bit of damage. And Deoxys Espeon is one of those ways, because with the GX attack for a Psychic and a double colorless, just 2 recharges and a manual attachment, the GX puts 10 damage counters anywhere you like, and that goes past the bench barrier Mew.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful to be able to get past Mew. Mew's going to be a card that lots of decks are playing. Obviously, expecting Pikachu Zekrom to be very, very good. Mew seems like an excellent one-card inclusion to stop that, but that can't stop Deoxys and Espeon from getting through. And since you're half-hitting with those Giratinas, putting Distortion Door damage, just like getting those little half-hits here and there, yep, spell tags popping off, you can very easily set yourself up to have a really, really big prize swing turn with Espeon Deoxys, even without the extra effect of the GX attack.
Yeah, obviously, if your opponent isn't playing Gust, or if they've used their Tag Bolt or something like that, you don't have to be worried about just benching the Espeon and have it become a what's the word? A disadvantageous Pokemon. So it's not going to be a liability. That's the
liability. That's the word that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's the one. Oh, it's not going to be a lie. I forgot words.
That's all right.
It's not going to be a liability on the bench. So you have time to take 2 turns to power it up for the 6 energy version of the GX attack, which allows you to put 20 instead. Which is an insane amount of damage to spread.
That's a lot, and especially when you get to choose exactly where it goes. And the thing with that is that you don't really need to really push that hard to get to that point. If you're managing to get multiple Malamar down, which is going to be relatively easy to do considering that people are going to be a lot more careful with their Gust effects, if you can get 3 or maybe even 4 Malamar down, then you can potentially power this up very, very quickly.
Yeah, and obviously the dream with this deck is you might not ever have to deal with a reset stamp ever. You might be able to set up your whole game to be able to take all 6 prizes in one turn with the GX attack of Deoxys Espeon.
It would be exceptionally powerful, a very, very good inclusion, and even just for the base level of that GX attack, 10 damage counters after half-hitting multiple Pokemon could very, very easily put yourself in a winning position.
And just to round out our support Pokemon, we run the Dedenne GX. This is probably going to be in every deck now that Tapu Lele's rotated, and we've lost a non-GX form of support in Let Loose Marshadow. I find it hard to believe that there'll be that many decks that be able to get away with not running this card.
Yeah, playing at least one copy of the Dene is almost the new starting point, and it reminds me of back when Tapu Lele came out. People were like, oh, we have to play at least one, and eventually people started running 3 or 4. I don't think the Dene's going to get to that point.
We got to 3. We got to 3, I reckon.
I remember playing at the Sydney International Championships. I played Zoroark Lycanroc with 4 Tapu Lele.
Yep, those are interesting times indeed.
They certainly will. We got to get that Bridget, man.
Yep. That'll do us for the Pokemon.
And it's a pretty solid Pokemon line, and most of them are easily searchable, which is the key for this particular format.
Yeah, if it's got Psychic on it, then we love it.
Absolutely.
Now we go into we'll start off with our supporter line. So we play 4 copies of Lily.
Very, very good supporter card.
There is a decent consideration in this format that's Professor Elm's Lecture might be worth considering. The only thing is, without Tapu Lele, I don't really feel like putting in more than like a couple copies of a card that's going to be really dead late in the game, even if it's perfect on the very first turn.
Yeah,
whereas Lily's insurance cards the rest of the game.
Yeah, exactly. But Elm obviously would be exceptionally good to set yourself up, get yourself 3 Inkies down, but those other 3 copies of Professor Elm are just completely dead, and without a way to easily discard them, they could potentially be clogging up your hand for the entire game, whereas Lily at least has a function beyond the first turn. Super, super powerful on the first turn. Probably not as powerful for your setup, but at least it's usable from turn 2 onwards.
Yeah, and the other thing Lily's really good at is allowing you to draw into energy and ways to discard them in the same hand as well. You 100%. Do need a large hand size to be able to pull that off more consistently. And to back up these 4 copies of Lily, we have 3 copies of Cynthia. It's always good to have some shuffle draw. There's a lot of like stool variants that are being hypothesized at the moment. But Cynthia's always been a good card and always will be a good card. Shuffle draw 6 is just strong. Yep,
that's 100% like the baseline good card. Shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6, that's never going to be bad.
Exactly. And so we're just running 3 of it because, well, we just need to play more supporters and it's good.
Yep, no, and without Tapu Lele, you got to draw into them naturally, so more supporters seems to be the way to go.
We also run 2 copies of Erica's Hospitality. Now, in my opinion, Erica's is a stronger supporter than Cynthia when it works. Unfortunately, it is terrible on the first or second turn when your opponent doesn't have very many bench, especially now with decks like Reshiram Charizard that don't have to bench very much at all. It can be very risky. But if you play a deck that maxes out at bench, drawing 6 cards when you've already got 4 in hand is like exceptional.
Yeah, well, the thing for me with Erica's is I think that it's much more powerful in the new format than it ever has been. Lots of decks are really desperate to set up their board with supporting Pokemon. Oh my god, I'm dying slowly over here. I'm just so excited about Erica. Oh, jeez. Things like Jirachi being played in almost every deck. People are going to want to bench multiple attackers every time they get an opportunity to. Lots of decks are playing other support Pokemon like Ganadel or any other support Pokemon really, like Malamar, things like that. Erica's, I think, is probably going to be the most powerful draw supporter in the game, but obviously turn 1, I would much rather see a Lily than an Erica.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, leading on to our next supporter, an even higher risk supporter in my opinion, and also brand new, is a completely legitimate copy of Hapu.
Yeah, I can't believe you've got one in English.
Yeah, it actually says Hapu on it.
Yeah, that's the full art for everyone who's not sure.
You can't see it. It's because the camera's pretty bad.
It's a bit of glare. There's a bit of glare on that one.
I've got a real full art English one. So what Hapu does, for those who don't know, because it just says Hapu on it, you look at it. So basically, you draw 6 cards, and then you choose 2, and you discard the rest. For a deck like Malamar, at certain stages in the game, it can have a lot of dead cards, but it's also really desperate to discard Psychic Energy, and Hapu is a really good way to try and do that.
Yeah, and you can
to mid-game.
Get those Giratina into the bin as well. It means that you don't need to have the combination of Mysterious Treasure or even the Dene to get rid of them. Hapu, you can grab the 2 things that you want and then bin the rest, hopefully a couple of energy in there. A very, very good option.
Yeah, I think this card has a lot of potential to be a good option in a lot of decks, especially these Mewtwo Mew variants that need to get tech attackers in the discard.
Yeah, that's true, and
I'm
even
expecting
even
to see
things
more and
like
more of it.
Blacephalon or even Zoroark Greninja that need to put energy in the discard for Naganadel. Hapu could potentially be an option there. I can just
Yep.
I can see a turn where I play Hapu with Blacephalon, pick out 2 Beast Rings, and then discard 4 energy. That would be sweet. But
That would be sweet.
that would be really
So
good.
I'll probably fiddle with the count of Hapu the most, I reckon.
Yep.
If Hapu proves to be really good, I could see myself cutting a Cynthia for it for a second one. But right now, I'm still yet to see the full potential of it. So
Yeah, it's tough.
We'll just keep it on trial for now.
Early testing, and obviously you've only got the 1 full art copy, so.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to wait till I pull another one.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll have to move on to our ball search here. We play 4 Pokemon communications because you have to.
Yep, it's the best one. It's the only card that can consistently search for anything in the game, so you have to play 4.
It's the best neutral search. It's the new Ultra Ball.
Ugh. that really is painful to say.
It's painful to say. I miss them so much. I really thought we were keeping Nest Ball, which is why it's hitting me even harder because.
Oh, you poor thing. That's sad. Because like at least I had it all in one hit.
Yeah. Well, we've heard enough about Pokecoms because we're going to talk about it in pretty much every deck review we're going to do.
Yep, exactly.
But this is the first time we're talking about how good Mysterious Treasure is.
Oh my god. This is like Ultra Ball. It's really good.
it's probably the best, if not the second best, search we have in the new format. I would say that in the decks that like to use it, Cherish Ball is like the best search in the format, but Mysterious Treasure is so much more flexible.
Mysterious Treasure is
and you
really
can discard.
Yeah, exactly.
Having the option to discard is actually becoming a rarer and rarer thing for non-fire type decks.
Yeah, and that's actually it's a huge deal because one of the things, like obviously reset stamps coming in and people are going to be taking prizes and getting stamped down to low hand sizes, and the way you used to deal with that back in the old days when N was a card was you'd thin your deck out, you'd Ultra Ball away things that you don't want and put yourself in a position where hopefully you can draw into the things that you do. And
yeah. They only shuffle back in good cards, and only good cards are left, and then you just draw into the good cards.
Exactly, but now we're going to have situations where people are getting stamped into just piles of just awful garbage because there's nowhere to discard. So this deck has the option to do that, not only with Mysterious Treasure, but with Hapu and Dedenne as well. So hopefully things go reasonably well and you can get yourself into a good position. But hey, Mysterious Treasure when you've got a Psychic main attacker and a Psychic support Pokemon, that sounds good to me.
Yep. And that rounds out our Pokemon search. It's phenomenally efficient. The combination of these two in this deck. So you don't actually need any more, despite the fact that, well, probably really isn't any more that you could pass off apart from maybe Friend Ball, but you're getting a bit on the fringe there.
Yeah, Friend Ball's a bit of a risky play.
So we'll move on to probably one of the most important cards in the whole deck, especially now that Field Blower's gone, and that's 4 copies of Spell Tag.
Ooh,
that gold is just glaring in the moonlight.
That's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Spell Tag is just it's exceptional. I mean, without Field Blower, it is a massive pain in the ass. Every tool that does anything important from now on is going to be a massive pain in the ass because there's almost no way to deal with it. It's entirely reactionary. So you have to find Lysander Labs if you're playing it the turn you intend to take a prize on something that has it. If not, this card is going to cause mischief. And if it's an offensive tool, then Lysander Labs isn't going to be very good for it because you can just replace the stadium and have the effect of your tool back. So
yeah. I think the thing with Spell Tag as well, like you said, Field Blower is no longer around, but I think that the real thing that is going to make this super strong is that Gust is so valuable. People aren't going to want to just move around the spell tags that you put in the active like you used to. Like if I was playing something like Wheezing now, I'd be like, okay, well I'm just going to Guzma around these spell tags until I absolutely have to hit into it. But if I'm only playing 4 copies of Custom Catcher, I'm like, do I want to use 2 of them to avoid 40 damage, or do I just cop it and deal with it? And when people have to make that choice, suddenly you're in a really, really good position. Your Distortion Door can come in, put 10 on 2 Pokemon, Spell Tag's going to put 40 more, plus you're doing 130, and that Giratina is suddenly doing like 190 damage onto your opponent's field when before it was only doing 130.
Yeah, when you start weaving in spell tags and you can take your opponent by surprise really easily. And that's the sort of the game plan we're going for with this deck. Now we've got a little bit of added consistency, and I expect to see this in quite a lot of decks as well, which is 4 copies of Acrobike.
Yep, and that one's even more glary, but definitely an exceptionally good card. One that's seeing lots of play in Reshizard now, for the exact same reason that it's seeing play in our post-rotation decks. We just need to see more cards, man.
Yeah, we just got to keep burning through the cards as fast as we can. We just got to pedal through, find those good cards, ditch the bad ones. That's the other thing, is not only do you get to look at more cards, you also get to thin more bad ones.
Yeah, you get to chuck away stuff that you don't want, and this deck has lots of cards that they want to have in the bin, so Acrobike, another decent choice.
Yep, and then for our stadiums, we have 3 copies of Viridian Forest. Now, because this is my first draft, I decided to go for the most consistent version I could possibly draft, which is why this is Viridian Forest and not Shrine of Punishment.
Yes.
I wanted to see how this deck would function with Viridian Forest as the stadium of choice, and whether or not it was necessary. Now, I think 1 copy is definitely necessary, but I reckon the deck could actually get away with playing just the 1 copy and cutting the other 2 for shrines. So that's something I might do in the future, because the added shrine pressure just adds another layer of power to this deck, and forces your opponent to replace it. Because now sort of every stadium is a Prism Stadium because it needs another stadium to replace it.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just field blower it. Yeah, you do have to look out for things like Marshadow from Unbroken Bonds that can pop off those stadiums, get rid of them. But I think Viridian Forest serves multiple purposes in this list. Obviously, finding energy is critically important, but discarding energy is equally as important. And we've talked about the value of being able to thin cards. Viridian Forest is a way to do that. You just want to make sure that you're not giving your opponent the opportunity to thin too many cards as well, because we want our stamps to stick whilst theirs don't.
It's a double-edged sword, Viridian Forest. It gives a lot of utility to both sides of the field, so you got to make sure that you're absolutely getting more value out of it than your opponent is.
And I think the other thing with Viridian Forest as well is that with the downfall of DCE, almost every deck is running basic energy, so Viridian Forest is always going to be useful against every deck that you play. So you need to be kind of cautious about that. It might be worth including the shrines, just knowing that most decks are probably going to be looking to Viridian Forest for consistency.
Exactly. Just having a counter stadium of your own when you're content with the amount of energy you have to sort of get rid of that option for them.
Yeah.
So we'll move on. We have our flex spots, which sort of help us do cool stuff. Now we're running Jirachi, so we have our suite of 2 switches, and we also run 2 copies of a skateboard. I think if you're running Jirachi and you're not running a skateboard, I think you overlooked it, and you got really excited that there were 2 to 3 extra spots that you didn't realize you would have, and decided to look at all these cool luxury cards. And then later, when you played the deck, you're like, "Where are my skateboards?
What am I doing? Why am I not playing these now?"
That's the only reason why a skateboard might not be in a Jirachi deck. It's just too darn good.
And the best thing is, like we were saying before with Spell Tag, the fact that Gust is at a premium and Field Blower is gone, you can probably afford to play less than you normally would. So like in a deck like this, maybe you'd play 2 or 3, now we can afford to cut back to the 2, because once it's on the field, unless they knock the Jirachi out, it's probably going to stick.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's got a skateboard on there, it can get out of dodge, so
yeah, exactly.
You don't have. And there's no Gust, so you don't have to worry getting Guzma'd and hit by a Zapdos, because that deck is dead.
Yep,
with no Guzma.
Gone.
It's just gone.
See ya later, Zapdos.
So, and lastly, the king of the format, and definitely also real cards, we played 2 copies of Reset Stamp.
Yeah, again, can't believe you got the English versions.
Yeah, I got secret rares as well. Yeah. gold stamps.
Reset Stamp is going to be such a massive card, and the fact that this deck can play 2 of them and afford to fit those 2 in is really, really important. It means that you can get your, you know how Let Loose, you sometimes just draw 4 bad cards? Well, with Stamp you can do that in the mid-game, and then when the Stamp doesn't stick the first time, they take a couple more prizes, you can afford to do it again later. Fantastic inclusion, and the fact that there's 2 is really scary. All the decks that I've been playing have only been able to fit 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think the added layer of fear for this deck, for Stamp in this deck, is because it's a 1-prize deck. You can go down to 3 prizes, stamp them, and then they can take another one, and then you can stamp them back down to 2 again.
Exactly. Even if they manage to get out of it.
Once they get down to those low counts, if you stamp them once and it doesn't stick, the game's usually over. But in this case, you have 2 chances to make the stamp stick. So
yeah. It's really,
this
really
is this is going to be a very frustrating card, and it's going to take everyone's combined efforts to figure out a good answer to it to make sure that you can draw out of it if you want to do well at Worlds.
Yeah, well, and that's going to be the key. Obviously, Jirachi looks like the play to do that, and this deck is playing Jirachi, so even if we get stamped, then we've got the opportunity to deal with it ourselves.
Now, this is perhaps one of the hardest things to try and figure out, which is just how many energy to play, considering how consistent we wanted it to be. I decided after looking at like different lists of Ultra Malamar and old gas can lists that I was going to go with 9 copies of Psychic Energy. Now, in the past we've run as many as 10. But as low as 8, and I think 9's about the right mark. So we can try and find enough. We got enough to find them to discard, and then also to manually attach as well.
Yeah, 9 seems to be a reasonably good number just to start off with. I mean, there's always the opportunity that we can cut down or increase if we need to. But I mean, Ultra Necrozma is playing like 10 or 11 energy and only 7 Psychic, and they managed to sort it out most of the time. And with our deck, we should probably be okay, as long as we have the outs to get them discarded. That's the critical bit.
Yeah, and that rounds out the deck. So, obviously, we've only played so far. We've only tested against 1 deck, and that was PikaRom. But from that game alone, I found that considering how strong PikaRom is going to be going forward, I think a copy of Mew is necessary in probably every list you're ever going to build in this format, because PikaRom is not going anywhere, I don't think, in the near future.
Seems to be sticking around.
And also, definitely need a copy of Brock's Grit as much as you made to test it, because if you lose a couple Malamars and one of them's prized, then you're not going to be able to finish out a game with only 1 Malamar if you're relying on Giratina to do all your damage. And with a Tag Bolt and 1 custom catcher, then suddenly, you're down a couple, sometimes 2 to 3. I think I went down 3 against Mitch in one of our games, and that was woeful. And I was
just
really
never going to win from there.
I completely regretted not having a copy of Brock's Grit. And the other change I'd probably make is putting in a couple of copies of Shrine of Punishment and trying to find cuts for maybe a 3rd, because that card seems to be really powerful, considering a majority of the new decks in the Worlds format that appear to be strong are GX based.
So it's definitely worth an inclusion. You could also consider including some Gust of your own, but obviously that's going to take up 4 list spots. It's going to be tough to include, and hopefully we can deal with the fact that we don't have Gust by using Deoxys Espeon. So it seems to be, on paper, it looks like a really decent list. I mean, like we said, we've only had the opportunity to test it once on the channel, but hey, I reckon it's probably due for another game, and I reckon there's a couple of fire decks floating around at the moment that might be worth taking a look at. So I think, Blake, we might chuck this one up against Reshizard or Blacephalon over the next couple of days.
Yeah, I'd love to pit it against one of those decks and see how it goes against something else.
Beautiful. So thanks very much, Blake, for sharing that one with us.
No worries.
And thanks everyone for watching. If you like the content, then please feel free to subscribe by clicking the sable eye in the middle of the screen. On the left is a video that YouTube thinks that you might like, and on the right we have our Worlds format playlist for more decks and battles. Thanks everyone for coming along, and we will see you all next time for more from the Sable Eyes. Bye.
Bye.